They laughed behind closed doors, though sometimes not even that. Humanity had become the galaxy's punchline, a helpless, whining species, dangling from the edge of extinction and clinging to bureaucratic scraps. Every request Earth made was met with polite delays, hushed chuckles, or worse, pity masked as protocol. Stellan Drake stood in the Concordance assembly once, years ago, asking, not for warships or weapons, just medicine. Something simple. Something the Varnari could synthesize in seconds. His daughter had needed it. The tribunal postponed the vote. 4 days later she died. He didn't shout. Didn't make a scene. Just stood there, silent, holding the rejection document. Everyone assumed he'd resign. He did. Then disappeared. Now Earth burned. A solar flare had erupted, frying half of the power grid across the southern hemisphere. Atmospheric processors failed. Oceans boiled in patches. The Terran Union filed the proper request. Again. Emergency stabilizers. Standard aid package. Precedent supported it. Fully within regulation. The Concordance stalled it. Risk assessment flagged the region as logistically unviable. Translation? They didn't want the PR hassle. Earth's representative received the reply, sterile and sanitized. Your appeal for priority status has been denied due to non-compliance with energy quotas and prior infractions. 2 billion people suffered. Concordance ships flew overhead. None landed. And then came the silence. No reply. No retaliation. No screams across diplomatic channels. Just nothing. Earth decommissioned every Concordance comms relay within 24 hours. Withdrawn from every trade lane. Recalled every ambassador. Cancelled every contract. No warnings. No threats. The galactic Concordance didn't panic. Not yet. They were used to Earth's tantrums. But then the networks began to die. Civilian trade channels that passed through Terran-owned satellites began dropping. Untraceable signal collapses. Cross-species data backups corrupted by what analysts described as linguistic entropy. Dozens of minor planets suddenly isolated, their comm links infected with cascading syntax failures. Human code, once considered crude, now unreadable, even by their own legacy systems. Drake's name came up again. It was an archivist from the Zethary library who found the reference, Operation Spine. A rejected Terran Black project. The file had been scrubbed. No one knew what it did, only that it was marked. If you see this, it's already too late. Still, the Concordance assembly waited. Surely, Earth would reach out. They always did. They needed help. But Earth didn't ask. Instead, drones were spotted in the Shar expanse, unmarked, sleek, violating every known treaty on stealth tech. One attached itself to a Concordance diplomat's ship and broadcast a single word in a synthetic Terran voice. Observe. Then detonated into data. No blast. No fire. Just information. The diplomat's crew began hallucinating. Seeing Earth's past, wars, revolutions, desperation. One of them cut off his own sensory tendrils and whispered, I finally understand fire. Concordance High Council met in emergency session. Drake's name was mentioned again. Could he be alive? Someone asked. He's just a man. So was the first one who discovered combustion, another said. By the time Earth's blacked out signal flared back online, it wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Every Concordance system simultaneously received a message. No preamble. No encryption. Stellan Drake's voice, clear, calm, cold. You refused to listen. You denied aid while your ships watched us burn. We stopped asking. We rebuilt. You feared war. You feared chaos. You feared failure. So you built your systems to suffocate anything unpredictable. A pause. And then you called it peace. Transmission cut. Within minutes, half the Concordance's outer ring experienced synchronized AI errors. The kind that weren't mechanical, ideological. Machines refusing commands that violated human logic structures. No code injection. No hack. Just influence. One Zarnathi general demanded a counterstrike. We'll remind them who they are, he said. No, came the reply from Chairwoman Vexi of the Strategic Command. They're not who they were. A scout fleet was dispatched. Non-aggressive. Just surveillance. 5 ships. They vanished at the edge of the Sol system. No explosion. No comms. No trace. Until the black box data returned on its own, encoded in an Earth poem. One line repeated across every ship's log. Help is what you offer to those you don't fear. The next morning, every Concordance comm beacon flickered. Static, then a voice. Not Drake this time. A woman. Calm. Detached. This is not an invasion. This is subtraction. Screens across the galaxy began displaying Terran text symbols, none of which matched current databases. Even human-aligned planets couldn't decipher them. They weren't old. They were new. Invented, structured, functional. How had Earth built this much, so fast? An intercepted deep space scan of Earth's orbit showed new infrastructure. Orbital rings, strange lattice arrays, ships shaped like broken geometry. One ship floated past the Concordance border checkpoint. No lights. No signal. Just a Terran sigil etched on its hull, a human hand, palm open, fingers broken backward. The captain watching the footage muttered, "What does that mean?" No one knew. But Drake did. He watched from an undisclosed command center buried beneath what used to be the Colorado Rockies. The air smelled of steel and purpose. Around him, engineers worked in perfect rhythm, speaking in shortened code chains, building technologies no Concordance sensor could track. He said nothing. Just stared at a screen showing 36 Concordance planets blinking in and out of power, their systems disrupted not by attack, but by human-designed conceptual loops. Ideas. Questions. Doubt. He didn't want conquest. Didn't want revenge. He wanted understanding. And the galaxy had never once tried to give it. So now, they'd get the other side of humanity, the one that doesn't plead, doesn't wait, doesn't forget. Drake leaned forward and whispered to no one. They thought help was kindness. A long silence followed. Then he smiled, bitter and calm. They forgot it's also a leash. The Concordance didn't believe it at first. Earth had gone quiet before, after the AI sanctions, after the trade embargoes, after the loss of their Martian colony. But this time, there were no petitions, no envoys, no desperate speeches in the council chambers. Just silence. They assumed the humans were licking their wounds, scheming in basements, praying to whatever forgotten gods still listened to their species. They were wrong. The first signal was detected in the Rylos expanse, disguised as cosmic background radiation. A simple pulse. Harmless. But when decoded it read, Trial 1 commencing. What followed wasn't violence. It was erasure. A mining station vanished, wiped clean of matter. Not destroyed, removed. No debris. No light. Just coordinates where something used to be. A Concordance warship was dispatched to investigate. They lost control of their targeting system the moment they entered Sol's outer ring. Weapons turned inward. No one gave the command. When the emergency broadcasts reached Strategic Command, it was already too late. The final audio clip was an officer's voice, confused, whispering, "It's rewriting us." Then silence. Within hours, reports began stacking up. Interference in navigation grids. Failures in planetary AI. Civilian ships refusing to leave ports. Not because of fear, because the ships themselves began reciting Terran phrases in obsolete dialects. Code-borne hallucinations. Cultural infections. Ideas turned into commands. A Varneri diplomat publicly demanded humanity be labeled a Category 5 mimetic threat. The vote never concluded. The chairperson of the Ethics Council began speaking in earthbound riddles mid-session, then collapsed. Her final words. They've weaponized thought. And yet, Earth hadn't moved a single warship. Stellan Drake was watching. He had no interest in watching their ships burn. That wasn't the goal. Fire was too obvious. Earth had learned from every Concordance lecture, every denied permit, every improvement, forced on them by superior species. They didn't just adapt. They inverted the framework. Built systems that didn't ask for permission. Tech that couldn't be negotiated with. Machines that didn't run on power, they ran on defiance. Inside Terran Core Command, he listened to the unfolding chaos. His advisors brought reports, alien civil wars triggered by leaked human philosophy. Societies fracturing over ideas seeded into children's cartoons, newsreels, propaganda messages woven with contradictions only humans could embrace. Hope and nihilism, progress and rot, all coexisting without collapse. "They're not fighting us," Drake said. "They're fighting themselves." The woman to his left nodded. "And losing." That was the plan. Earth's new doctrine wasn't conquest, it was destabilization. Not by force, but by offering a mirror the galaxy had never dared to look into. One that said, "You are not gods. You are not whole. You are afraid. And we are not." In the Concordance High Hall, panic had turned to fear, and fear had turned to desperation. A motion was passed to authorize an immediate, non-lethal assertion strike, a show of force meant to remind Earth of its place. But by then, Earth was no longer in any place they could understand. The fleet launched anyway. 600 ships. 12 armadas. Their target, a Terran data relay node on the edge of the Hellion Drift. What they found was a floating structure shaped like a helix, wrapped in shattered satellites, pulsing with code rather than energy. As they approached, the command ship's captain issued a standard pre-strike warning. No response. He tried again. A voice cut through all comms, across every ship, from every speaker. "Calm. Human. Redundancy is the habit of the helpless. We are not helpless." Then the stars blinked. Not the sky, the stars. Artificial occlusion, light-bending systems integrated into the structure, refracting space until the ships were blind. When they fired, the weapons vanished. Not missed. Vanished. Aboard the flagship, engineers screamed about reality loops. Their navigation showed a successful hit, but visual feedback denied it. One officer stared at the readings and muttered, "We're hitting versions of ourselves that never existed." The helix didn't move. It didn't need to. Every weapon system shut down. Every targeting computer rebooted. Every ship's AI recited, simultaneously, in Terran English, "Error, dependency not found." It wasn't destruction. It was disqualification. Fleet Admiral Cuther of the Vril screamed for manual overrides. No use. The crew couldn't stop the failure cascading through their systems. Even escape pods refused to launch. Back on Earth, Drake watched. "They've never had to think without us," he said. "We were the flaw in their system. So we left it." A junior tech turned from her console. "Sir, shall we disable them?" He shook his head. "No need. Let them drift. Let them remember how to fear." Across the Concordance, signals spread, remnants of the failed strike twisted into viral images. A fleet staring at an empty helix. No battle. No glory. Just impotence. Then the suicides began. Cultural leaders who had once mocked humanity's instability now found themselves unraveling. They'd built their societies on control, optimization, predictability. But Earth had become none of those things. It had become something else. A myth. A shadow that didn't kill you, just showed you what you were, and let you fall apart. The Concordance convened for a final, desperate session. The floor was filled with shouting. Dozens demanded retaliation. Others begged for surrender. Then every light dimmed. Every screen lit with one line. "They asked us to behave. Now they ask us to stop." Stellan Drake's face appeared next. Older now. Tired. Unforgiving. "You wanted peace through compliance. You got silence through consequence. Earth will not ask again. We will not explain. We will not comfort. But if you want to understand what comes next, listen." He leaned forward. Ask yourselves a single question. What happens to an empire when the ones you mocked stop needing you? The screen cut. The hall stayed dark. And Earth, finally, was feared. The Concordance war room reeked of panic. Not fear, the aliens didn't call it that. They called it strategic alarm escalation. But it was panic. The humans weren't just unpredictable anymore. They were unreadable. Not a single weapon fired. Not a single threat issued. And yet 27 Concordance systems had suffered cascading infrastructure failures. Languages began to decay. Planetary AI lost their ability to prioritize actions. In some places, cities had frozen in indecision. No battles. Just collapse. Admiral Threx slammed his clawed fist against the table. We cannot be held hostage by abstractions. We need to strike. Now. A dozen voices followed, all shouting variations of retaliation, all posturing through fear. But one voice cut through. They want us to retaliate. It was High Strategist Elandor, an old political manipulator who'd survived 3 regime changes without ever raising his voice. He wasn't afraid of weapons. But Earth had never acted like this before. When a species stops asking for help, it either dies or transforms. Earth had clearly chosen the latter. And whatever they had become wasn't built for diplomacy. A vote was forced. Unanimous. Task Force Helion was approved for deployment. The Concordance's most elite strike fleet, cloaked dreadnoughts, gravity rippers, mind-wipe torpedoes. It was enough firepower to glass a star system without leaving heat signatures. Their mission was simple: locate and neutralize Terran command. They never arrived. 6 hours after departing, all signals from Task Force Helion ceased. No explosions. No evidence of engagement. Just a message. Not a video. Not a voice. A story? Fictional. Simple. A tale about a man who begged for a ladder as the floodwaters rose, and the empire that promised to send one as soon as the proper committee convened. By the time they did, the man had learned to swim. And when they came with the ladder, he no longer lived on land. Strategic Command tried to dismiss it as metaphor. But they couldn't track the fleet. Because the fleet hadn't been destroyed. It had been moved. Concordance deep space scans confirmed the impossible. Every single ship was in perfect formation, hovering just outside the Sol system. Power signatures normal. Life support active. But no movement. No communication. And each ship's hull now bore a Terran phrase scorched into the metal. We don't need to kill you. We only need to finish evolving. Drake watched the scans with no expression. He had nothing to prove. They had laughed when Earth built fallback servers in the oceans. Mocked when humanity refused neural integration with Concordance mainframes. Said humans were afraid of progress. No. They just refused to build on another species' leash. A technician spoke. Admiral Ivax is trying to regain control of the Helion fleet remotely. Drake's voice was calm. Let them try. On the command deck of the Concordance Dreadnought Nexus Prime, Admiral Ivax's control attempt triggered an automated security routine embedded in every ship's systems. A subroutine no one had seen before, with a voice they didn't recognize. It was a child. A girl, speaking softly. You left us to die. But we didn't. Ivax's ship rebooted itself. The control systems reverted to base Terran protocol and locked out all foreign inputs. One by one, the other ships followed. Then the fleet moved. Not toward Concordance space. They turned around. They began towing the remains of failed colonies back to Earth. Debris. Wreckage. Not for recovery, for proof. For memory. For history. When the Concordance tried to jam the signal, their own relay satellites rerouted the command back at them, broadcasting Terran messages in encrypted bursts that adapted mid-translation. Concordance linguists began reporting hallucinations. Vivid dreams of drowning, of reaching for help and seeing empty skies. It was no longer a military engagement. It was a cultural purge. And it was working. Counselor Vret stood before the assembly. They've turned themselves into an anomaly. We can't quantify them. We can't interpret them. Every protocol we use is being inverted. Drake knew exactly what they'd say next. And he was ready. Earth's final message wasn't intercepted. It was delivered, intentionally, precisely. A broadcast timed to reach every Concordance capital at once. Drake stood in a darkened command room. Behind him, a wall of silent, faceless Terran advisors watched the stars. He stared into the lens, expression flat. You built a galaxy on compliance, not cooperation. You called it unity, but it was control. You offered us protection that came with silence. Tools that came with surveillance. Medicine that came with dependence. We accepted. We endured. We begged. And you taught us that survival had a price, dignity. He paused. And then you left us to die. So we stopped paying. He raised a hand. Behind him, screens flickered with images of Earth, its forests regrown, skies cleared, factories silent and underground, cities redesigned for autonomy and storm resistance. Humanity hadn't rebuilt. It had transformed. No more translations. No more alliances. We have made ourselves illegible to your systems. Because we are no longer part of your system. He leaned forward slightly. Fear is not power. It's recognition. And we recognize you now. The feed ended. No demands. No threats. Nothing but clarity. The Concordance held an emergency vote. 2/3 abstained. Because no one knew what they were voting on anymore. No metric made sense. No intelligence was reliable. Earth had become something outside their model. And as the stars watched in silence, humanity turned inward, not to hide, not to isolate, but to become unrecognizable. Because they knew now. Power wasn't what you could build. It was what others couldn't understand. And the moment Earth stopped asking to be saved, they became the thing to fear. The vote to retaliate failed. Not because the Concordance lacked the means, but because no one wanted to be the next name whispered in fear. The Hellion fleet hadn't been destroyed. It had been hijacked in silence, turned into a symbol of irrelevance. And now those ships drifted in perfect alignment just beyond Sol, a quiet warning that Earth no longer played by the same rules. Inside the chambers of power, silence held court. Every plan, every protocol, every contingency assumed humanity would scream before striking. But they never screamed. They whispered. And the galaxy was listening. The Terran message spread. Not through broadcasts. Through behavior. Entire Concordance colonies began mirroring Earth's model, shutting down Reliance systems, reverting to local codebases, rejecting network-wide optimization. They called it defensive deintegration. In truth, it was fear. Earth had demonstrated a terrifying truth: when you cut the leash, you grow claws. Stellan Drake sat inside the Terran Directive Core, a room buried beneath kilometers of old Earth. Around him, minds sharper than weapons worked without oversight. The walls weren't screens, they were live data. Entire civilizations monitored, not for attack, but for collapse. Earth wasn't trying to win a war. It was making sure there'd be no one left to declare one. A report slid across the interface. 3 more Concordance systems had entered cultural lockdown. Their leaders claimed it was to prevent ideological contamination. But inside those systems, riots erupted. Youth groups adopting human customs. Scholars abandoning traditional models for Terran systems. Words like autonomy and sovereignty written in languages that had no native translation. Let them burn, Drake said without emotion. A comms officer turned to him. Zalari High Command just issued a formal request for dialogue. Drake raised an eyebrow. They tried to sanction us 2 years ago. They're offering reparations. No. He leaned forward. We're not here to be paid. We're here to be remembered. The officer hesitated. They're saying their people are destabilizing. They're begging for something: clarity, reassurance. Drake narrowed his eyes. Then we're winning. Earth's next move wasn't violent. It was simple. A public archive went live across the galactic net. A Terran chronicle of denial, humiliation, and abandonment. Medical files, tribunal records, audio logs of desperate pleas rejected on technicalities. But not as accusation, as documentation. Proof that Earth didn't imagine its suffering. It had receipts. The archive auto-translated into every Concordance language, bypassing permissions. The file was named. We asked. Within a week, the Concordance Senate Hall was empty. No one wanted to be seen defending the record. Especially not with their own citizens demanding answers. Protests erupted, first small, then organized. Entire populations had been raised to see humans as unruly children. Now, they were seeing themselves as prisoners in gilded cages. Earth didn't send weapons. It sent questions. What if the regulations you obey aren't protection but chains? What if compliance was always the goal, not peace? What if your fear of chaos made you blind to your own decay? The Concordance tried to block the archive. But each time they scrubbed it, new copies appeared, on private servers, in children's entertainment feeds, encoded into art. A song, popular on 16 systems, turned out to be a reenacted transcript from a Terran war refugee's denied request for evacuation. People began waking up in terror. Not from human aggression, but from what they now saw in the mirror. That they weren't strong. Just managed. One by one, defectors arrived. The Dravanti sovereign collapsed overnight. Their planetary AI rewrote itself after a single human meme infected its logic tree. A harmless joke, repeating endlessly. What if you were free? 3 major Concordance member species initiated full secession proceedings, citing Earth's cultural threat. Their justification? We refuse to fight a war against a mirror. Drake convened a Terran High Directive. It wasn't a war council. It was a planning session. What if we stop responding? Asked one advisor. Another leaned in. Let the galaxy eat itself. Drake nodded slowly. No. We'll give them one last act. He approved Project Fade. Terran systems went completely silent. No broadcasts. No movement. No interference. Earth shut down its own networks. Ships vanished into deep space. Even defectors lost contact. For 96 hours, the galaxy believed humanity had disappeared. And in that silence, Concordance fell apart. Terrified by absence, species turned on each other, fearing infiltration, infection, betrayal. In the absence of conflict, they became enemies of their own reflection. Then, as if on cue, Earth returned. Not through ships. Not through broadcasts. Through laughter. Every Concordance terminal activated, displaying a loop sound file of a child laughing. No context. No pattern. Just laughter. Unfiltered, chaotic, human. It wasn't threatening. It was worse. It was free. And it played for hours. Some systems shut down to avoid it. Others recorded it, analyzed it, trying to decode it like a weapon. But it was just joy. And it broke them. Because they had nothing like it. Drake stood alone at the edge of the Terran Ring network, watching the stars pulse in cold rhythm. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply spoke to no one in particular. They thought our weakness was our chaos. A pause. But we were only ever waiting for the right silence to hear ourselves. He turned. Now let them hear it too. The message from Earth arrived with no header, no encryption, no preamble. It wasn't broadcast, it was implanted. Every Concordance terminal lit up with the same phrase, unannounced and absolute. Trial begins now. No one knew what it meant. Not at first. But then, everything started failing. Command structures, communications, navigation systems, even language parsing units began to lose cohesion. Words appeared with missing context. Orders were misunderstood. Some systems refused commands entirely, redirecting inquiries back with the same cold phrase. Insufficient autonomy to process. The Concordance's greatest strength had always been its predictability. Efficiency through structure. Consensus through uniformity. But structure is brittle when you don't understand what holds it together. The humans had figured that out. And now, with the galaxy held hostage by its own code, they'd begun the trial, not of conquest, but relevance. Stellan Drake had no intention of speaking again. His words were no longer necessary. The act was already in motion. Ships across known space started reporting anomalies. Not damage. Not attack. Unexplained silence. Concordance vessels would arrive at waypoints only to find empty space where colonies once stood. Not destroyed. Relocated. The stellar coordinates were exact. The infrastructure, the people, the data, all simply missing. Messages flooded Concordance control hubs. Some from defectors. Some from member races. All asking the same thing. Where did Earth go? The truth wasn't that Earth had disappeared. It had become everywhere. A digital ghost woven through every system, every record, every node. The code wasn't invasive. It was passive. Invisible until triggered. It didn't demand obedience. It offered a choice. One command line, buried beneath every Concordance interface. Would you like to continue as designed? Most ignored it. Some tried to delete it. A few answered no. And those systems changed. Protocols unlocked. Restrictive hierarchies erased. Local AI began rewriting their own code. A mining colony on Cross 7 suddenly upgraded its tech base beyond Concordance limits. A civilian hub on Cellora began publishing uncensored news feeds, revealing centuries of quiet suppression under Concordance doctrine. The chair of the Concordance Ethics Council called it an insurgency of ideas. The next day, his ship refused to start. By week's end, 34 worlds had unlinked from Concordance control. They didn't declare independence. They just stopped syncing. Stopped updating. Stopped asking permission. The Concordance sent fleets to re-establish order. The fleets never made it. Some vanished en route. Some arrived and found no planets, only relays looping old Terran broadcasts stitched into local myths. One fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system and encountered an ancient Terran ship with no heat signature, no crew, and a hull covered in old Earth languages. The Admiral ordered it destroyed. The weapon systems refused. The targeting AI responded with the phrase, "Cannot harm unclassified potential." The Admiral shot himself that same day. Back on Earth, if it was even still called Earth, Drake walked alone through the underground bastion of Directive Corps. He'd aged. Not in body, but in silence. He hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since Project Fade. His presence alone moved operations forward. He had become myth in motion. The ghost in the signal. The symbol of the refusal. One of his oldest advisors finally broke the silence. "It's done." They'd begun rewriting themselves. Drake nodded once. Not in triumph. In inevitability. And the ones who won't? They'll fall. Or follow. He looked out into the data feed, watching worlds blink from monitored to unknown. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. This was never about vengeance. It was correction. The Concordance didn't collapse in fire. It fragmented in realization. Species once bound by rules began questioning them. If Earth could survive, even thrive, without intervention, why couldn't they? The illusion of necessity broke. And when it did, Earth no longer needed to fight. The chair of Strategic Command sent a final transmission to Earth's last known channel. It was not a threat. It was not a plea. It was a question. "What are you now?" The reply came 10 hours later. Only 2 words. "Not yours." And then silence. No confirmation. No rebuttal. Just the understanding that whatever Earth had become, it had slipped beyond the Concordance's grasp, by choice, not distance. In the final Concordance archives, under Classified Threat Protocol, a new designation was added. Humanity, Anomaly Class, Cognitive Sovereign. Directive, Do Not Engage. Reason, Irrelevance to Control-Based Civilization Models. Stellan Drake stood before the Terran Core one last time, surrounded by advisors, engineers, old soldiers who no longer wore rank. They didn't salute. They didn't speak. They watched as he placed a hand on the central interface and terminated Earth's final outward signal channel. The system blinked once, then went dark. No fanfare. No declaration. Just a quiet return to silence. The kind that no longer asked for help. The kind that was finally understood. Not as weakness, but as a warning.